All right, so it's Digital Music Trends Midem edition for 2013, and I'm here for the first one of our series of daily shows on Midem with Emmanuel Legrand, who writes for a magazine called One Movement for Music. So, hi, Emmanuel, and thanks for joining us. How's it going?
All fine.
All right, cool.
Have you heard some good music here?
Not yet.
Not yet?
We'll see.
Yeah. C2C is playing tomorrow. You have to see them.
Okay, cool. Absolutely. And also, we got Martin Bryant from the Next Web. So, hi, Martin. How's it going today?
It's going really well. It's a good point, actually. For a music trade show, I've heard absolutely zero music. It's far more of a tech show, really.
Yeah, really, at this point. Hopefully, we'll hear something tonight, but I'm not absolutely sure that that's going to happen. So, we'll see. We'll see. All right. So, let's start by talking, in these shows, we're going to basically talk you through a little bit of what we've seen during the day. And then I might intersperse with a couple of interviews I've done as well to talk to some of the people that were here. So maybe it's a good place to start to talk about the Midem Hack Day, because it's just started this afternoon, and we were both at the session where they talked about what they were going to do. Essentially, it's the third or fourth time that the Midem Hack Day happens here, so of course it's not a new thing for Midem folks. It was interesting today that they had a pitch session for artists to actually pitch some ideas as well on that. So how do you feel about this new edition of the Hack Day, and like how do you feel about the vibe there?
I've spoken to a few of the hackers, and they're looking forward to it, very upbeat about it. I hear there's no caffeine in the coffee in the room, but at least there are windows, which apparently is an upgrade on last year where they were in a windowless room. So that's good to hear. That's promotion for the hackers there. But
I wanted to have you on the red carpet as well, so tonight they can look at the NRJ Awards.
Fantastic. Today there was the pitching session, and I don't know. What did you think of the pitches?
The pitches were interesting. I mean, there were some interesting ideas, especially the ones that came from that were a little bit more formulated. Because I think some of the ones that came out of the blue, where people just literally like sitting down whilst they were there and thinking about something and coming and say it. So maybe there were a couple that were a little bit odd, but most of them were actually interesting. I think I quite like the chat roulette thing for musicians, actually.
Yeah, chat roulette for musicians. Hopefully with no nudity.
No nudity, zero, none.
Yeah.
Or at least like a guitar,
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if the hackers really do take up any of the industry ideas, or whether they just go for their own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Emmanuel, have you ever heard about the Music Hack Day and in the previous Midems?
Yes, unfortunately I couldn't go to the Hack Day because I was doing a presentation myself on the old side of the music business, which is music publishing, and actually it's the oldest side of the music business because music publishing is 500 years old.
Yeah, absolutely.
The first music publishing company was in Venice in 1501 and published, and it's staggering to think that actually this business has been going on for so long.
Yeah, and it was actually the first way in which music was monetized without that involving a performance, really.
Yeah, and the guy who did that managed to secure a 20-year monopoly from the rulers of Venice, the Doges or whatever they were called, because otherwise he would be printing music that somebody else would be picking up and doing the Xerox of the times and then selling it, so he wouldn't make any money. So he secured a monopoly for it. Yeah. Hence that's how the copyright monopoly started.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were saying that you did like a sort of a publishing for dummies type session, because there's a lot of musicians that, I mean, publishing is actually still a bit of a black box, as much as at Midem every year they try and raise awareness on how everything works and how it all works. But a lot of musicians are quite scared by the idea of music publishing. They don't really understand how they go about exploiting the rights on the front. Do you feel like that's true still?
Well, I think the audience was listening, and there was about 80% songwriters and musicians in the audience. They should be interested because that's the most important and valuable asset that they have.
Yeah.
A song is a song, and that's their asset. That's their retirement plan. That's their heritage. That's going to survive them. And the better the song, the more likely they're going to make money. The situation now is far more complicated than it was a few years ago because you have all these, multiple platforms. So it's great so that you can get your music on, far, more platforms than any time before. but getting the money out of the platform is the most difficult part.
Yeah.
So they should never surrender their publishing. That's the Beatles. The biggest mistake that the Beatles ever made was to sell their bloody publishing company.
Yeah.
And now it's Michael Jackson who owns the Beatles publishing
and Sony ATV at this point.
and Sony ATV. So it is be careful. Message. Don't give away your publishing.
Yeah, and if you do it just as an admin rights for 5 years or something, and then yeah, absolutely.
But the thing also is that once you're dead, the copyright will continue to exist, and for at least 75 years, and so that means that your kids, your grandkids, probably will live off your whatever you're writing today. So be careful.
And publishing is actually one of the industries that has seen less disruption from new startups coming up because people that don't work in publishing, I think would find it quite hard to actually enter the market with a startup. And in fact, one of the few startups that I know of is the one called Songtrust from New York. They got the same CEO as Downtown Publishing, so of course they have a big background in publishing, and they are trying to disrupt the space by offering certain services that only bigger publishers offer right now. But there isn't a whole host of startups that are doing this, which is interesting because there's so much money there. It's just that nobody knows how to synchronize it.
Music publishing, there's two aspects in music publishing. One is the A&R aspect. And the other one is the licensing aspect. What you make, what money can you make out of publishing? And the thing is that it's the infrastructure that you need to monetize the copyright that is paramount these days. Because I don't know if you've ever seen an Excel spreadsheet with your revenue lines.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have video on YouTube. It's 0.00012 euro. Or dollar or whatever. So it's a tiny amount of money.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to have the infrastructure to bring that money. And I think that's what Downtown has done with that spin-off, is actually they realize that there is a market for aspiring songwriters and musicians, and they provide a service that is not expensive at all, but allows them to get money back into their pockets for the use of their music.
Yeah, absolutely. And you were talking about YouTube. Actually, I went to a session today called the $100 billion music business. So basically, now the music business, I think, they said it was around $70 billion worldwide, which, counting inflation, makes it the same size of the music business in 1966, apparently. So we're going back in time a little bit these days. And the aim of the session was to figure out, how is growth going to happen? We want to get to $100 billion from the $71 billion that it's now. And of course, YouTube was a big driver of that conversation. So Martin, what's your take on the monetization of YouTube? And of course, it's pennies, much less than pennies. Do you think that can really amount to a meaningful revenue for artists?
Well, I think that you need to consider, yes, it's pennies, but then if you then compare that to one play on national television, for example, and over time, all those individual plays add up to the royalties you get from one play on national television. So it's just a different way of consumption, really, where it's a lot more granular. I do wonder if the big money days of the music industry will never return. There's so much more competition for other entertainment sources these days. Yeah. So I think the music industry may just have to be content with not being quite as big as it was in the past. Yeah, and the premise for the session was that music is woefully undervalued, and of course they need to find more ways to monetize the music that is out there. I mean, some people, the cynics, would say they're trying to draw more blood out of a relatively dry stone. So, Emmanuel, do you think there is a way where they can get more money out of the business?
I do believe, because there's far more platforms that have been licensed, from music publishers and record labels than ever before. But I think the big breakthrough was with the streaming sites, and we're starting to see now that the impact that Spotify had on the Swedish market now, which is probably they're 3 years ahead of the rest of the crowd. And when you see the digital now, the revenues in Sweden are going up and up, but also now for the first time in years, overall revenues from the music industry have grown in Sweden. So it's the first time in probably 10 years that that has happened. And that's the Spotify effect. And if you add the Spotifys and Deezer and Pandoras, etc., there is a basket there that can grow. People in the US tell me that because of the car market over there, the moment you will have bundles of Spotify or Pandora into the car when you're buying your Chrysler or your Ford or your SUV, and Spotify is already available on tap, and it is actually the monetization has happened through the car manufacturer.
Yeah,
that is going to pay the rights holders. You know, a lot more money is going to go into the pot. And I think there's going to be more of these. At the same time, you're going to see more and more microtransactions. So it's the complicated part, as you mentioned. You know, it's granular in the sense that, you know, then you have to get layers and layers and layers of tiny little, you know, pennies or parts of pennies, and you know. Yeah. In order to make the big flow. And that's all about infrastructure, but also it's all about data. And you know, one of the things I did today was to go around different stands where, you know, talking about data like DDEX, you know, which provides standards.
Absolutely.
Or people like Collector or Musicmetric that monitor what happens on the internet or on radio, etc. These two parts are going to be crucial. One is whatever metadata you have with the music files, and the other one is how can you know, what you can monitor that goes through, you know, the internet. Yeah. And once and if you connect the two, then you can start monetizing, and that's going to be, I think, another, you know, crucial moment for the whole system.
Absolutely, and I'm just gonna take a short break. I think we're gonna talk about Musicmetric next, because I know that Martin had also spoken to them today, so we can talk a little bit about them and their news. And I'm just gonna put a couple of minutes of the interview with Kevin Wortis from Girly Action, talking about you know, crowdfunding and direct to fans. So we'll be back in a couple of minutes. Let's talk about, because of course, you know, one of the most probably the most famous, you know, crowd-funded campaign of last year was Amanda Palmer's, which was the first to reach over $1 million target for a musician, which is incredible. But of course, people are taking that as sort of a benchmark and think, oh, you know, it's so great to do crowdfunding. And then we looked at some figures towards the end of last year when some of the labels published their spending on A&R, and you compare the amounts of money that are being generated through crowdfunding with the spend of you know, majors on A&R, and of course it's a tiny amount of that portion. Right. So how do you work on releases that don't have the same amount of publicity as Amanda Palmer's, and how do you deal with maybe a campaign that had a little bit of a harder time to get started and to get going?
Everything's got scale. I mean, the Amanda Palmer one blew up, and we certainly didn't go in thinking that we were going to gross $1 million. There are smaller ones. We did a Kickstarter campaign for an artist called Cody Chestnut. In the rest of the world, he was released on One Little Indian, which is a great label, and he's got a history with it. His pedigree, his legacy in the US is self-releasing, but he needed some funds to do it. And he wanted to bring us in full service. He simply didn't have the cash flow for it. So we presented him with a Kickstarter campaign, and we came up with a figure that he needed, which was $20,000, and put together a set of packages and bundles that we thought his fans would like, and rolled it out, and we made it. It didn't blow the door off that goal. I can't recall where we ended, but it was just positive, just over 20,000, and it was a total success in terms of what we set out to do. Yeah. And that was very effective. And what that did was it's effectively pre-sale. So it's not that he didn't feel like he could afford it at the end of the day. It was just simply a cash flow issue. Yeah. So we set up a pre-sale. We used the Kickstarter platform to do that. And the money came in. That took care of some of the expenses that he had to self-release. And he's off to the races on his first U.S. tour this month.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to follow up on the conversation we were talking about earlier about Musicmetric. You know, Martin, you said you were quite interested in that startup, and what was your impression of them? Yeah, I mean,
they're certainly not new. They've been around for a while now, but yeah, had a good chat with them today, hearing about their latest news. So in the last week, they've raised a big round of funding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they've integrated Spotify data into their platform. So I think it's a really exciting time for them. They're well positioned to be an industry standard base of analytics that people can go off to for monetization, for monitoring all sorts of different marketing activities around music. So lots of really exciting time for them. And I think what's interesting is they recently hired the guy to lead their American expansion, and they found him at Midem last year, which I think is a really good indication that anyone involved in a music startup really should be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about how, you know, that there's not that much music and it almost feels like a tech show. And of course, technology has taken over the show, although there are still many country stands upstairs, and there's a lot of people that we probably never get in contact with that are doing, you know, the day-to-day, you know, crunching the numbers, selling deals from artists of different countries, but we don't really see that. We experience mostly the technology side of it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And there's enough of it here. And what surprises me is there aren't more technology journalists here, because it's my second year here, and I really, really enjoy it. And it's a great chance to meet, okay, they're all based around one subject, music, but there's so much interesting innovation going on here, especially around data. I was interested last year, for example. I came here and I was talking to one startup that was doing stuff around discovery of new radio stations using metadata from radio.
Yeah, MPME, they're still around.
Yeah. And then I went to another stand and talked to somebody else, and they were doing analytics around radio data, that exact same data, but using it in a different way so that musicians can discover where they're being listened to in different parts of the world, so they can identify where they should focus their marketing efforts and things. So the power of that data is truly exciting. It does feel just the kind of startup-y technology side of things here really just feel a lot more exciting. You walk around some of the more traditional music stands, and they're kind of a bit more subdued. And there's not really much action going on there.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's also the average age of the people that are at the stands. You know?
Think for yourself. You know, I'm the old geezer here.
But, so Emmanuel,
I just wanted to add something. The Musicmetric.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
It's not abstract. You know, it's something. First of all, you can access a lot of the data on their website for free, and they're tracking 750,000 artists, bands around the world, and monitoring what's happening, you know, with Last.fm, YouTube, social networks, etc. A few weeks ago, I was in their office, and I was with a Dutch guy, and the guy said, "Okay, well, EnterDope DOD, which is a rap band from the Netherlands," and the curve was actually flat and nothing was happening, and suddenly you had a big peak and then something going down, and we tried to figure out, you know, why suddenly, you know, nothing was happening, and, you know, there was something. They went to a music festival in Paris. They were totally unknown before, you know, setting foot on stage, and within 3 minutes they set, you know, the stage on fire, and people started tweeting like mad and sharing on Facebook, etc. Hence, you know, like, so what is fantastic is that it gives a tool to managers and artists to go to, you know, you go to a booking agent or a concert promoter and say, this is what the guys managed to create in terms of reaction from an audience when they're on stage, and they were absolutely unknown the minute before. So you go there with that kind of story and say, well, if you book that band, you're going to have the same reaction, and, you know, your audience is going to love it. Sure. So that's why it's not abstract. It comes from, you know, chasing the metadata. But the use that you can make for it is really it's tangible, and that's great, and that's, you know, and you have far more information now than you ever had about who are your fans, where they are. You know, if you track, you know, Australia, and you realize that you have more fans, you know, on the east coast of Australia than the west coast of Australia, you're probably going to start a tour on the east coast rather than the west coast. You know, that kind of data, you didn't have that before. Yeah, it was just guesstimates.
Yeah. Glad to welcome to the show today, to Digital Music Trends Midem 2013 coverage, Vincent Borel. He's the co-founder and the head of business for WebDoc. And hi, Vincent, how's it going today?
Good, thanks.
And Olivier de Simon, who's head of music. How's it going?
Hi, good. Thanks for having us.
All right, so I've introduced them as, you know, WebDoc, but of course you can see that we have t-shirts that say "You Are" on them, and so I have to ask you guys, first of all, what is that all about and what's happening?
I think it's your turn.
Like Olivier said, it's my turn, and it's going to be your turn pretty soon. So WebDoc is rebranding into YourTurn. And with it comes the next generation of our social expression platform.
That's great. So, how did that come about? Of course, it's what if anybody would describe it as a pivot for the company, and a new name and a new approach to how you do things. So, how did that come about, and how did you decide to migrate from WebDoc to YourTurn?
Yeah, I think like any startup, it's a constant learning experience, and you learn from your users and from their uses.
Yeah.
And over the past year, we've last year at the same time we were lucky enough to win the Midem Lab, which got us a lot of publicity within the music industry. And very soon after, we started, getting fairly decent traction on the music, and it just kept growing over the year. And we were getting more and more requests from labels and artists who were trying to find a deeper sense of engagement with their fans, and they were wanting to leverage user-generated content as a means of developing that tighter interaction.
Yeah.
And so through WebDoc, they were able to actually get fans to publish content about the artist or around the artist, which spread the word and grouped the fans together around the content they were creating. And while doing this process, we kept trying to optimize and improve that experience for the fans and making it more natural and more pleasant for them. And I think as we were doing this process, we kind of keyed on something that we today call expressions, which is at the heart of YourTurn.
Yeah.
And expressions came about with this notion of being able to create interactive templates where users are very easily able to insert personal content into a pre-formatted post that can contain many elements. So it could be, multiple medias, multiple pictures, or pictures and sound, pictures and video, and include also, the template defines kind of the visual mood and visual design.
Of course, yeah. Absolutely, and looking at sort of the startup side as well, thinking about the pitches that were done at the Hack Day introduction too. There's a big hunger for disruption in the live space as well, because that's also a space that apart from Songcake, that of course have done amazingly well, and their new Detour option, which is of course in beta, is not completely open yet, is an incredibly interesting way to crowdsource concerts. There hasn't been a lot more disruption done with concerts, so do you think we're going to see a lot more of that coming soon?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Vyclone today, and they're doing some very interesting stuff around being able to put together like a live video from a concert. It's quite interesting though that they're doing that with video, and Colour was a very high-profile startup that absolutely failed. It was doing something very, very similar with photos just a couple of years ago, and then there's something like Vyclone, which is picking up lots of excitement with major label artists and things, and I think they're gearing up for a big year themselves. What really impresses me about what they do is how you can then have this synchronized music video created by the fans, and they can just do their own interpretation of a song, and just with their phone, and then it can all be automatically composed into a crowdsourced pop video that works really, really well, and it's a beautiful piece of software.
Absolutely, and it's the technology side of it as well, because of course Vyclone has got a huge technology base to make this all work, because you hear about it and you think, oh, this sounds good, but is it going to work? And it actually does work, which is the interesting thing, and so that's of course one of the startups that could disrupt the space, but yeah, people haven't really figured out yet how to really promote interaction of fans at gigs. There's still a lot of looking at Twitter, looking at feeds, searching for the name of the band. So that's probably like something that will come up soon, of some sort of tool to connect the fans that are in the same place at the same time.
But do you really want the fans looking at their phones constantly?
That's inevitable, I think.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think they are now, if you go to a gig, it's just people holding up their phones, or even worse, iPads, taking photos and videos of the gig. I suppose it is inevitable, but it does take something away from the experience. I think if you're then looking at your phone constantly and missing the great things happening on stage. Yeah,
exactly.
Well, JoyTunes is all about music education and actually revolutionizing the music education and the way we start learning instruments. The music education way of learning is basically stayed the same for the last 300-400 years, and only lately it started really getting a push from apps. Have a lot of music education apps, and we're really taking it to the next step. We're letting you learn to play a musical instrument with an app, but you use your own instruments with no cables or no hardware needed, just polyphonic acoustic recognition in real time. You use your own instrument to play as a game controller to play the app, and we build it in such a way that it teaches you how to play.
Absolutely, and how? Yeah, exactly. Emmanuel, on the audio front, do you think there's a lot more that can happen on the disrupting the space of distributing the audio, or is like a company like SoundCloud, for example, now own the space, and there's really not that much more space for anybody else to come in and disrupt that?
There's always going to be innovation, disruption, innovation, and adaptation. And I think that's the whole point. We have no idea what's cooking in the Google labs, or what's cooking at the MIT or lab or whatever, or a young guy, in a garage somewhere in Boise, Idaho, will find the killer app or something. So that's the great thing. I think the sky's the limit these days. I think the restriction that we will have is time.
Yeah,
and that's I think the more and more emphasis on curation, on filters that can help you access the music that you want, or the movies that you want, or the pictures that you want. But it's also frightening. It's like one of the great pleasure is browsing through things until you find what you want, and that's what it was. People my age, my generation, love to go to record stores because they could spend hours just browsing and going through. So that experience will continue online and offline, but I think too much curation might also be counterproductive. You need to be pointed in the direction of something, but you also need to do your little bit of homework. I think it depends on the audience, depends on the age, depend on what are your interests in life. I think we're just seeing the start of because the technology. Remember, there's 5 years ago, there's a lot of people who were offering something that intellectually was compelling, but the technology was not there yet. I think we're getting closer to what technology can offer with and adjust it to the dreams of. But the one thing that I find very interesting these days is there's a trend towards greater quality of pictures. Now you have the new Nikon camera is absolutely staggering. It really gives you what an Hasselblad would give you 50 years ago. But the same is happening with music. You had crap MP3 with terrible sound that you had to beef up in order to get a little bit of oomph. And now you have all these companies, Neil Young's company and a few others are trying to offer you an experience with music with the highest quality possible. Yeah. And that is also great because we are going back, full circle into something that brings you quality of sound, which is something that we forgot, somewhere along the, it was, portability was fantastic, but we lost the sound. Yeah. Now the sound is back, and that's great.
Yeah, Martin, what's your take on lossless? And it's an endless debate. I mean, I'm not going to even go into it. I mean, last night I saw a 1 hour argument between two of the guys from the Hack Day, two of the developers, talking about how one of them maintained that humans can't really hear any difference between an MP3 encoded 190 kilobits or upwards, and the other saying that no, he could, and that he wanted lossless. So
yeah, well, I think part of that's down to your ears, but it's funny that I know some people who can't tell the difference between standard definition and high definition on television. Seriously, but I think that as there's increasing bandwidth for streaming, as there's increasing capacity to bring us lossless audio in a meaningful way, in an easy way, then I think that will just be a natural thing. I mean, just as it's a lot easier to get 1080p video streamed to your laptop now, and just a couple of years ago that would have been crazy and scary, and it would buffer forever. It's becoming a lot easier, and so I think with lossless audio, it'll be exactly the same. It'll just be a natural evolution. Yeah.
So let's talk about Spins.fm. You're the CEO and you're sort of data scientist looking at all of that side of the app. How did the company start out, and what was the idea that you had behind starting it?
Sure. So it came out of a totally natural need for some clients that I had worked with in the past. I've been doing digital strategy and web marketing for a number of major label artists, and all of them love radio. So despite the fact that all these streaming services are becoming a lot more popular, radio still has more listeners than all the streaming services combined. So artists love radio, but it's increasingly difficult for them to leverage their online fan base to offline conversion with radio. Yeah. So an artist named Travis Porter, it's a rap trio from Atlanta. They were one of our first clients, and we had created the application for them, and a number of other Sony artists and executives then saw it and said, hey, we want that for our artists, or for a number of other artists. And Britney Spears then was our first kind of huge artist that used it, and from there we've had great adoption. Chris Brown, Diddy, Missy Elliott, John Legend, tons of huge major label artists have been really supportive and been using our app.
Absolutely, and I'll explain how it worked at the beginning, because I'm just wondering, you had all these requests for people that wanted the track to be played on radio, and then how did you pass that on to the radios if you didn't have a pre-existing relationships with them?
Sure. So the radio stations don't need to be using our app in order to receive the requests. It's all filtered just through Facebook and Twitter. So how it works, the fan connects either with Facebook or Twitter, which verifies their identity and their location, and then depending on which song they're requesting and where they're located, we display the relevant local stations, and it's delivered to the station either as an @ message on Twitter or as a Facebook wall post.
Oh, it's awesome. That's great. So do you work directly with radios now, or?
We do. Yep, absolutely. So we started just focusing primarily on the artist, but in order to make this product successful, we now have to have the radio stations on board as well. And in the US, we have 3 of the biggest broadcasting companies now using our app, which is really exciting. If they do install the application, they get a lot more metrics and reporting, filtering by song automatically, by location. So there's definitely some advantages for them using it. And we're actually really excited here at Midem. We're announcing that we're expanding to the UK, to Canada, and to France as well.
That's great. And it's and I just wanted to finish by talking about music as a loss leader. I mean, there was a session earlier that I talked about, and the CEO of Mspot, Darren Sui, who the company got acquired by Samsung and is now become a Samsung service as their music offering. He stressed that while Samsung thinks that music is super important and content super important for their development, they are not prepared to, they're going to invest heavily in music, but they actually want to see a return on that. I mean, he said basically they don't want music to be a loss leader for the devices, and that I thought was interesting, because I always had the impression that when a Sony or a Samsung or an Apple even, because the iTunes Store is not actually making that much money effectively after all the operational costs are taken out, all these operations were in theory loss leaders to sell devices. But if that's not the case, then it becomes a more interesting conversation if they're actually trying to extract value for the music industry.
Can I start with that? Well, I think it's common sense, I would say.
Yeah.
Like if iTunes started as a loss leader for Apple to sell devices, and now they've realized that it is a profitable entity, and it's a very good store. If you look at it from that perspective, and they're providing value for money, and therefore you go there and hopefully you stay there. Amazon has also discovered that but even the experience is not as good. It's a bit clunky and Amazon-esque, I would say. But then you have the mobile phone operators. They have that link already with the consumer. So then their question is whether they are going to improve their experience, or they're going to try and improve, they improve the experience limit the churn, because that's their main problem, because the renewal of subscription is very expensive, so you have to give them something so that they stay, but at the same time you cannot give them freebies all the time. So it's how much you can incrementally ask them to pay before they move away to someone else who's going to give it to them for free. So I think there's going to be a lot of work done, in fine-tuning what can you offer at what cost, and what kind of, does it make sense to offer 1.5 million songs when actually most people use less than 300? So can we, for example, you can do that kind of limitation, and then if you want more, then you pay for a bit more, and so on and so on. I think there's going to be a lot of models that are going to be experiment in the next few years, because we don't know yet what's going to click with the audience.
Yeah. And Martin, what's your take on this?
I think it's evolution of the model. Absolutely, it's a very different world to when iTunes first launched, and lots of new offerings on the horizon. You don't know what's going to turn up tomorrow and change things. It could just be two kids in a garage somewhere in the middle of nowhere, just completely transform the music industry overnight, like Napster did. It's impossible to say, but I think what's interesting though is talking about the kind of the balance between devices and music, is that devices are entertainment now themselves, in and of themselves. The amount of people who will be desperate to find out what's happening at the latest Apple keynote and things like that, and they'll be watching the live blogs, or if Apple is actually streaming it, they'll be glued to it they'll have it in the diary for well, but it's entertainment, and it's something else in a way. It's something else from music to compete with in some strange way.
So I guess the idea of music as a loss leader gets substituted by the idea of a device being the entertainment part. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it was great having you guys on. Anything you need to plug or want to talk about for what you're working on?
Do check out the Next Web at thenextweb.com. I'm going to be writing up various bits and pieces that are found here at Midem over the next few days.
And your Twitter handle is?
Martin SFP.
Cool, great. And Emmanuel, anything your side?
Well, I'm working on for Midem, for the website, on a white paper on licensing. Very exciting topic. It's licensing is the oil between the platforms and the content, the rights owners. So it's paramount. If the licensing process does not work, then there is the machine is broken. It's like if you don't put oil in your car, it's kaput. So that's going to be my main task and tomorrow I'm moderating an hour and a half session with European Commissioner Michel Barnier, who's in charge of internal market. Internal market in Brussels jargon also covers copyright issues, and he's going to be for the first time doing an open meeting and discussion with people from the music industry, and that should be very exciting. And we have among the speakers, we have Paul McGuinness, who's U2's manager. Yeah, sure. And so I think it's going to be U2's manager with the European Commissioner. That should be quite exciting.
Yeah, it should be fun. I had a weird 15-minute interview with Monsieur Barnier, but it was with a translator because, of course, I didn't have enough French to actually do the interview, and it was very formal.
Well, I think my French will be okay when it comes to that.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you very much.